Hi everyone. Um, Welcome to another event presented by the IIBA Ireland chapter. Thank you all very much for joining. We're delighted to have you. We're delighted, or for those who are expecting Joe, sorry, my name is Patrick. I'm the treasurer and I'm just stepping in for today. Today we're joined by Marcus Udokang, who is going to present to us on business process management. So basically, I'm going to give a quick introduction about Marcus. We're going to have the presentation and then we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. Okay, so our very special guest, Marcus, specializes in both business analysis and project management. He's worked over several industries as a consultant, including education, financial services, and oil and gas. He's spoken at many events and is a very qualified coach in this subject. And very interestingly, he is the host YouTube channel, The Inquisitive Analyst. I would very much recommend it, and I will post a link in the chat for everyone to go and check it out. Okay. So thanks everyone for joining, and Marcus, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you everyone for showing up, and welcome to today's presentation. Thank you IIBA Ireland chapter for having me present today. As you've heard, today's presentation title is Business Process Management, a well-defined starting point for projects. You have to start off by asking a few questions about business process management. Why do we need process models? When do we need process models? And how do we build process models anyway? But most importantly, what's in it for you? What's in it for all of you? In order to be able to answer a few of these questions today, I want to look at 3 points. I want to look at what is business process management in particular. I also want to look at business process modeling. And lastly, some process design approaches. And that will include some things like mind maps, business rules, capabilities, as is, to-be diagrams, and all that kind of stuff. So we're going to look at business process management, business process modeling, and process design approach. And that should give you a better understanding of why business process management is a well-defined starting point for projects. Now, I'm just wondering, Patrick, I'd like to put a link in the chat if I may. Let me see if everyone can see it. Everyone. There we go. Now that is a Mentimeter link. I'm hoping you can all see it. And if you click on it, it asks a question. You know, when we say business process management, what comes to mind? And if you type into that Mentimeter, or you could go to your cell phone at mentimeter.com and you can type in the numbers 5268 5571. So either click on the link that's in the chat or the number that you see on screen. You can type into a field at menti.com. And if you have a chance, type in your ideas. You can type in 1, 2, 3 words, type in a word, press enter, type in a word, press enter. I want to get an idea of what business process management is to you. When I say business process management, what comes to mind? So we've got planning so far. There's got to be more words than just planning, maybe processes. I'll leave that to allow you to enter. Maybe we'll look back at that later. I know we only have 12 people on the call, but I'm sure that some of you can enter more than just one word. We got tracking, monitoring. Okay, well, keep at it, and we'll come back to that if we have a chance. Hopefully we do. I want to get an idea of your understanding of business process management. Oh, we've got administration. I like these: planning, tracking, monitoring, administration. Anything else that comes into mind, by all means, feel free to type it in. So let's get back. Oh, we've got process. That's vitally important. And we've got flows. Good. All right. Splendid. I like to see this. Administration flows, process planning, tracking, monitoring. And let's see if all these come up. No idea. No idea. No idea. Let me see. Evaluation, right? Okay, splendid. I like the new idea. It's either someone with a good sense of humor or someone who's being quite truthful, maybe a bit of both. All right, so let's move on back to the presentation so we can ask ourselves, what is business process management? But before we get into business process management, what I really want us to look at is, what is business analysis? Because in order to solve the problem, in order to answer the question, what is business process management, we need to understand what is business analysis. If you look at the BPM in chapter 1.2, it says that business analysis really is the practice of enabling change in an enterprise or an organization. And we do that by defining needs. We do that by recommending solutions. We do that by delivering value to stakeholders. I mean, this is often done at the delivery level as a business analyst, not necessarily at the decision-making level. But business analysts can certainly be strategic. They can certainly be operational too, right? So it's all about continuous improvement, if you think about it. I mean, business analysis can also be understood in terms of a current state, which will help you to define a future state. And in order to understand that, you really have to see things at a strategic level, or at least be able to understand them, if not help to create that strategy. And business analysis can be performed from different perspectives with, let me see, IT. We can use Agile. We can even use business process management to perform business analysis. And that perspective of that business process management, really that perspective is our lens, our view based on a current context. And that context may have been created, say, by a business initiative, right? That's going to make some change in the future. If we look at the BPM chapter 2.1, it says that being a BA, there's a perspective of need and solution design. And the organization really articulates their needs and the outcomes that a business analyst helps to document. So that's what you bring to the table as a business analyst. You tell the organization what you are there for and what you will contribute to. And you do so by understanding the strategy and the context that you're in, right? Now we can look at business process management. And I've got at the bottom of some of these slides, you'll see that there's a reference to a BPM chapter. Like in this case, we've got 4.4, 6.1, and 7.1. So I'll make mention of those along the way. Now, if we look at chapter 7.1 of the BPM, it's talking about building a process model. That the process model really is a visual way to convey information. And it all starts with a communication, some form of communication, some form of shared understanding. And that allows us to analyze, it allows us to refine our elicitation results into some form of requirement, some form of design. And it's a way to represent activity flows. It's a way to show a sequence of actions, a sequence of events. That's why we use process models. It's a tool within the business process management. And if we look at BPM chapter 4.4, it talks about we're here as business analysts for a shared understanding, because communication is all part of the decision process. It's all part of business process management. When we look at requirements, we have to see what's the corporate strategy? What's the corporate mandate to give context to our design? And in the context of the organization's strategy, how will we solve this problem? Well, you start by maybe reading annual reports. And that will help us understand the context. I mean, we understand our need, we understand our value, but reading those annual reports, for example, or any other form of documentation might help us to understand the context that we're working in. If we look at chapter 6.1.2 in BABUC, there's 4 things that are mentioned: technology, policy, stakeholders, and process. And this is the change. This is what's needed for us to look at in order to be able to understand the change that's needed. This is going to help us define our current state, and that's going to help us shape the future state. So we've got to understand technology, we've got to understand policy, stakeholders, and process. So what does the stakeholder want that we as business analysts can give them? When we're talking to stakeholders, in order to be able to elicit this information, we can say to them, this is what I know, this is why they're saying this, what's your take on it? And that's going to help you understand the context. That's going to help you understand to build a process map. If you don't understand the business process or the data model, for example, then you can't build the process diagram. You have to understand what the benefits and the implications of that specific diagram is going to be to the business. So how do we improve business in the context of software applications, of IT systems that this organization uses? What are the technology and the business implications of all this change anyway? Because if we're not changing processes, if we're not improving performance, then it might be considered a waste of time. So we've got to make plans for the changes. We've got to know how to deliver the changes. We need to understand what the problem or that opportunity is that we're trying to solve. We have to understand why we're trying to solve it. I mean, what's the impact? What's the benefit that we're making from this change? What's the opportunity? What's the cost that we might lose if we don't make that change? Should we make the change now? Or should we wait a few weeks or a few months or a couple of years to make the change? So we now know what business process management is. It's a way to model, to analyze a business process. Business process management is a way to analyze a business process, or one of the ways. So let's take a look at process modeling. And I've got a reference to the BABUC chapter 10 here. We know that a business process model describes that flow of work, that flow of activities in an organization. And BABUC chapter 10.35 says that process modeling is a standardized graphical model that's used to show how the work is carried out. It really is the foundation of process analysis. It's work that goes across defined tasks. And a process model really can also help us to document operational procedures. And if you look at chapter 10.3.5.2, it says that it shows how work aligns to different stakeholders. It allows us to understand relationships between processes. I mean, what occurs or what will occur during a specific process. It also gives us context of a solution, or maybe even part of a solution. BABUC chapter 10.34 says that process analysis, we look at process analysis, it really assesses a process for its efficiency, for its effectiveness. and it identifies those opportunities for change. So now we get a better understanding of what we're doing with this process model. We've got to also make sure that the solution addresses the right issues and that we're minimizing waste. So with that in mind, I've got another question for you. Let's go back and see if we can take a look at some of these answers. And I would like to go to the next slide here. Do you create business process diagrams, or have you created them in the past? So again, menti.com, and you can type in 5268-5571, or you can click on the link that's in the chat. I'll put it up again. And you should be able to see this slide, and you can type in either yes or no, or you can select yes or no, rather. So we got 67% of people, 75% of people saying that they do create process diagrams, and a small percentage that don't do that. And it's fluctuating a bit, but somewhere around 86 now for yes and 14% for no. Okay, again, we can come back to this a bit later, but you can certainly type in, we've got no at 33% and yes at 67. But the solution is really here, rather the answer is here. More people have done process diagrams than those who haven't. All right, we'll slip back to the presentation at hand. And, I hope I'm on the right slide. Yes, I am. All right. Okay, so now that we've had an understanding of process analysis and process modeling, let's move on to look at business process modeling. So we looked at process analysis, we looked at process modeling, and now we're going to look a bit deeper into business process modeling. Now, what does it take to create the perfect business process? Process or process, depending on where you are in the world. Now, realistically, it's not easy to create perfection. We all know that. But one can certainly strive for a degree of excellence. So let's talk about creating that excellent business process. We need to have in that process a sequence of activities that's going to result in an output. So we've got to, first and foremost, we've got to start off with, before we even decide to model a process, we need to gain this understanding of what activities the business does and why. So it's important that we spend a bit of time learning what the standards are, what the business rules are that help to drive processes. And while we're at it, we should be asking a few questions. Are there gaps in the standards currently in the business that you're working at? What are the gaps between what the business says that they do today and what they actually do, and what they should be doing as per industry best practices? I mean, what's their vision for the future in the short term as well as the long term? Our business process model should be able to create a shared understanding. That's what we're looking at. It's going to show us how processes flow, or how a process flows. And it's going to also help us detect and fix any problems that are currently occurring. It's going to help us refine, to streamline processes, to fix some of those problems, to make it more refined, more streamlined. We need to also discover the organization's pain points. We've got to explore their challenges. We've got to examine the benefits of re-engineering their business processes to address those gaps, to address those pain points. But most of all, we've got to understand. We've got to be able to understand how to demonstrate to the business that we know what they do today. We know where they would like to be in the future. Then we can start modeling this current and the future processes. But we got to know where we're starting from first and foremost. Let's look at characteristics of an excellent business process. And to do that, we're going to look at a few process development considerations. Now, our process is comprised of a series of events and functions. We know that. They're performed by roles within an organization. We've got inputs, we've got outputs, we've got logical operators to control that flow of activity that's helping to support that system. I mean, all these things are connected, right? We've got processes, functions, events, roles. We've got data. We've got all these things connecting together. So it's critical to achieving excellent business process to be able to understand all these items. Also, to create a perfect or this excellent business process, it doesn't really just end there, understanding these items. I mean, these are the technical characteristics of an excellent business process. But historically, or from experience, we know that the creation of an excellent process has many more facets. I mean, what about the presentation? What about how you present this to your audience, to your end users? I mean, what else is important in creating an excellent business process? This is an example of an as-is diagram, a very simple one I did at work not long ago. So we'll use this as an example. And we've got to the right an explanation, a brief explanation of the symbols that we use in a process diagram. So we obviously need start and end points. We need a process step. Maybe we might need a database, or we might need to represent a document or a page connector, or maybe even a decision box. So these are items on the right that show you each of these things, like a database or a page connector. We could use Visio, like what I use to draw this specific diagram, or we could use something like Lucid Chart for you Mac fans. In the case of Visio, you're manually managing those structures. It's not, say, an application like elements.cloud, which is in the cloud, and you update the process diagram or create one. Someone else can make an update. You can watch what they're doing, or it might send you a message to say that there was an update. So you can't really do that in Visio, but if you're a beginner, even if you're an advanced builder of business processes, Visio can certainly do the trick. We also know that a process model starts with a verb, right? We need like create something or build something. It has to start with a verb. We also need some degree of clarity and readability. As you see, there's lots of space here. It's easy to read. If I zoomed in to this picture, I could easily read the writing that's typed in white. So the actual modeling of the process is critical to its clarity and its readability. Obviously, content is important, and if the process is not well laid out, it can be very difficult to interpret the content. So presentation is really everything. We've got the start and end points. We've got clearly defined inputs and outcomes. You can see from the green the green start and end dots tells you where the process starts and where the process ends. And this is a swim lane, so there's different people involved at the top, at the middle, at the bottom. There's also a degree of space separation. There's an effective use of white space, which can help to enhance the readability of this model, especially when we are free of physical constraints. If we have a wide screen, or if we can send it to someone in PDF and they can blow it up, we can use as much space as we really need. Also look at the layout. Whether we lay out a process horizontally or if it's vertical, if it's a swim lane, we should be able to pay attention to that logical sequence of events and how the eye follows the process flow. We're doing everything from left to right, and top to bottom. And unless we're incorporating some loop, we should really avoid having that process move backwards. We're always going left to right. And we're keeping that flow going forward. It's all about readability and clarity. This is paramount to your business process diagram. And like I said, the flow's got to go from top to bottom, left to right. right? Look at the lines as well. You know, the lines that join these events, these functions, you know, they shouldn't really cross over, or try not to, as best you can. And if you do have them cross over, there's a little semicircle option you can implement in Visio to indicate that it's crossing a line, just so it's better to read, right? What about the size? You know, we should try not to be constrained by the physical size of the printed copy. We may be able to print this on a plotter like I did at work. Sometimes it's even best to compartmentalize the process on separate models. If we're drilling down, we can have the simple model on one page, and maybe we can click one of those boxes and it'll take us to another model on another page. You can do that in Visio. You can do that with elements.cloud as well, especially if you want to drill down to sub-processes, right? I can see there's a Q&A. See what this is. Oh, Bazagi Modeler is a good tool for modeling. Most indeed. There's a link in the chat for it. Fantastic. And Patrick asks, what notation or UML would you recommend using when modeling? I'm going to be talking about things like BPMN shortly coming up. So we'll leave the answer to that question a bit later. All right, so we've got the idea of size, lines. It's top to bottom, or rather left, right, top to bottom. We've got the layout, the space separation. So it gives us an idea of readability and clarity for our process model. This is the to-be diagram that is a continuation of the as-is diagram I just showed you, which I had to create. Again, this idea of clarity is very easy to see. Now, processes really provide information that is interconnected. You know, a process diagram is a shared document. We're going to give it to other people and users. So we have to construct this document with collaboration with our stakeholders. So it's got to be understood by all those users who are involved in the project. It should be also reusable. If you're in an agile environment, if you've got these iterations, you want to be able to reuse this document over and over again. You also might want to be able to add to it over time. So it's got to be editable, it's got to be reusable. And it's got to be able to, you have to be able to share it with your stakeholders. In order to be able to make it understandable to your end users, it's got to have context, right? So reusing, I should also mention that when you're reusing these documents, it's going to save you a lot of time, it's going to save you effort, it's going to save you cost, assuming that the requirements are easily accessible, that they're easily structured on that diagram as well. So we understand the context in which the stakeholders work. We know that they execute strategy, obviously, they're executing strategy. So we need to be able to understand from the strategy down how our processes relate to the delivery of the organization's services, to the organization's customers. So it's this process map that's going to help you to define more detailed requirements. So we've got to make sure that we manage these process diagrams through maybe even version control, right? Again, elements.cloud has built-in version control. Visio doesn't, so just make sure that you have a naming convention for your files so you don't lose track of your updates. You've also got to know to whom you will hand off this process map to when you're finished building it. Is it going to be someone like an end user that's going to have edit access to it, right? So you've got to make sure that that's, if it's on a cloud device and it's got edit access or not. Right? So you've got to be able to understand that as well. Now, this is coming toward that second question we had about UML and whatnot. Process modeling types. There's different process modeling types. So let's look at a couple we'll go deeper into this SIPOC or SIPOC, like I like to call it. There are many techniques and methodologies in process analysis, and the scope and the purpose of the project will obviously help determine which technique, which methodology that you choose to use, or how rigorously you want to follow certain rules. So if we look at SIPOC, if we look at Babcock's chapter 10.34, it says this SIPOC, as I like to call it, is a process analysis method. It's a tool that cleanly shows that flow between the problem, its opportunities, the gaps, the root causes. It gives you that clarity. So it allows you to understand those suppliers, the inputs, the process, the outputs, the customers, the SIPOC of that process that's being analyzed. And you can see the suppliers are aligned to a step 1 box, the inputs are aligned to a step 2 box, and so on. So it'll be easier for you to create that process by using something like a SIPOC. When you're interviewing your stakeholders and you're taking notes, you can dump some of these notes into those columns for supplier input or process and so on. And it'll make it easier for you to create your diagrams. You might even have a step 1A, step 1B, step 1C before you get to a step 2A, right? There's also value stream mapping. That's another process analysis method. I won't go into it, but it certainly is an option out there. And I think chapter 10.34 talks about that as well. That's where you would probably have processing times for all your inputs and other processes if you want to be able to understand how long it takes for that entire process to be completed. There's even the option of business process model and notation, known as BPMN. And that's really used for more technical audiences. And then there's your UPN modeling, which you can use. A very simplified version. It's really aimed at business users. And that's what I demonstrated by showing you the process, the decision boxes, and so on. It's a very easy way to build a diagram, probably the way that most business analysts build diagrams, right? So stick it out with UPN. You should be good to go. Hopefully that answers that second question that was in the Q&A. So let's look at process design approaches, or a process design approach. You got to ask yourself, how long does it take to do a process? So you've got to ask your stakeholders and give me an idea of your approach and your philosophy, as well as the steps that you follow, right? And the big 3 things we need to look at are standards drive process and requirements, process drives more requirements, and the best practices or best industry practices also drive process and standards. So we're trying to seek to understand what the company does today and why. So we've got to learn how their system works today. We've got to review their current documents if they have any. We hope we do. We hope they do. That will help us to understand their standards, their processes, their current processes. We want to be able to look at different business units, learn how to use their current systems as well, to point where you understand how their current process is working at the moment. You've got to be able to reference the standards that you believe influence the process design. So you're going to try and get them, you're going to ask them, what do you do today? I mean, what do you do, or why do you do what you do, right? What are your pain points in the process? What's the root cause of these pain points? Maybe they know, maybe they don't know. What are all the standards that you follow? What are the gaps that are in the standards today? So you've got to meet with business units prior to, say, any workshops that you have, and you've got to get a better understanding of what they do today. What are those pain points? What are those processes that they do today? One book that I highly recommend is called The Business Analyst, or the Business Analyst's Handbook, written by Howard Podeswa. And he, in this book, if you go to, well, the entire book is all about who you should invite to meetings or workshops, and the types of questions that you should ask during interviews. So for example, I've got a screenshot here on page 69, chapter 2, it tells us when we're working with business process analysis, we should invite customers, process owners, product managers, even architects to this meeting, even service managers. And Howard gives us some examples of questions we can use. I've highlighted one specifically here. You can ask them, what are the problems and the bottlenecks or the inefficiencies with your current workflow? I mean, what is the current as-is workflow? You know, are all the participants in the end-to-end process accounted for? What's the role of each of these participants? You know, which participant carries out each activity in the workflow? There's a whole bunch of questions. There's only 4 or 5 on the screen, and the half the page has even more questions as well. So take a look at that book if you have a chance. Pick it up on Amazon. You're going to take the responses from these questions that you've asked your stakeholders, and you're going to put them into, say, a SIPOC or say a mind map. So let's assume we've put all this into a mind map, right? The mind map, and this is a screenshot I've given you of a mind map that I did at my workplace not long ago. So a mind map is really a form of note-taking, a visual note-taking, and it helps us articulate, it helps us capture ideas in a very non-linear way. It uses images, it uses words, even a bit of color like you see I presented, and it's all about connecting relationships or connected relationships to give that form of structure, to give that form of logic to our ideas, right? And the mind map also provides this central idea that we've got. And in that central idea, here mine might be information technology. And then from that, we've got secondary ideas, secondary topics, right? And then followed by that, we've got subtopics and so on and so forth. So it helps us to be able to capture concepts and ideas. It helps us to think in more complex ways, or to think about complex problems. And it helps us to explore the relationships between these problems. It inspires, in a sense, a bit of creativity, a bit of creative thinking, right? A bit of analytical thinking. So mind maps are always a great form of visual note taking. Once you've got the information in here or in your SIPOC, I think I've gone too far, we need to be able to seek to understand what the organization is not doing, but should be doing as per industry best practice. You know, it's just as important to stand back and look at the as-is process that's done today and ask, what are they not doing today? So you've got to ask why they're not doing this today. Is it from a standards gap? Is it a knowledge gap? Is it because they're driven by some external process? Maybe there's a major cut, financial cut to the project, and so you've got to cut corners. And you know, there's certain things you can't, you know, standards that you can't do. You decided to jump over them. Is it because of current limitations that are not found in a specific document? So you've got to ask these questions. You've also got to use project and content expertise to help design a better process. Where these unanswered questions exist, you've got to make a discussion for them, right? How can they improve the process to address these pain points? You know, you got to look for risks in the process that would help, or that are helping impede the solution now that you want to unimpede. You want to be able to bring added value to the table as a business analyst. So you've got to take time to understand what they do today. And if possible, you've got to take the time to develop the overall high-level as-is process. You got to review that with the business. You've got to be able to reference the standards that influence that process design. And you've also got to be able to include the requirements in the process that they have today. You've got to publish those pain points, publish those gaps for reference, And if time permits, you've got to try to update this as you learn those new pain points and gaps, right? So you're always trying to optimize the performance of the process, and process execution is constantly changing, and you're constantly measuring, constantly assessing for new opportunities, right? I just briefly put something here on strategy analysis. We have to have a business need. I mean, that's why we're doing this, right? And so we've got to be able to set a baseline. We've got to be able to set a context for this change. That will help us define the current state and the future state. We've got to be able to assess risks. We have to be able to understand the uncertainties that are around the change that's going to be happening. I also want to mention something about business need. Business need is really the problems and opportunities that are faced by an organization. We know that. So we've got to be able to keep that in mind, right? Let's take a look at testing, at workshops, at training. You've got to be prepared to test your proposed to be process against those gaps, against those pain points. You can do this if maybe the business requests that you do it. You might even prepare a workshop. You know, are all the materials available? Are they completed? Are they printed out? And do you have your pens, your post-it notes, your whiteboard and all that before you go into the workshop? You've got your flip chart paper and so on to be able to manually draw this stuff up. Is training required for your end users? You know, different ideas and different concepts might come up, and you've got to be prepared to be able to train people on those processes if it's needed. So you've got to document thoroughly all the comments, all the parking lot items, all the decisions, all the risks that might arise. This might take time, and that's fine. You've got to be able to document this as best as possible, because if you don't have it, it might sting you in the behind later on, right? So it also allows you to be able to follow up with stakeholders with more questions further on down the road. So it's all about clearly identifying what topics must be covered in each phase of your detailed design, right? If you can demonstrate that the value that you bring is that of best practice by doing what we've talked about today and using that content knowledge, that expertise, I think it'll take you a far, far way. Very quickly, I did mention business rules earlier. I tried to look through BABAC to find a deep definition of a business rule. I couldn't find it. The best that they can give is a rule is how you identify, or should I say that a rule is there to be able to govern decisions in an organization, or rules help shape and guide business behavior. But I've read Ronald Ross's definition of a business rule, which he wrote many years ago, and he says it involves a fact, a definition, constraint, and a derivation. So if we can quickly look at that, I think it'll help you in the long run. A fact, are we creating a quote? Are some artifacts being created alongside, say, maybe a client order? A definition, I mean, what is a client order? That's a definition. A constraint is really 80% of business rules are constraints. You know, something that we have to resolve, or a problem that we have to get through to understand the constraints of that problem. And then we've got a derivation. You know, if you need to calculate something, you need to understand the formula that's going to be able to solve for a specific number. Maybe you've got a total or an average that's derived from data. And a business rule might be something like provide a tax receipt for a donation that's over $25. That's a good example of a business rule, which you should be documenting in your process diagram as well. And quickly on process and capability. I mean, what's the difference between a process and a capability? A process is what we do, and that starts with the verb create client order. And then the capability is how we do it. And that capability includes a few things. It includes the process. It includes a procedure, data, people, applications, technology. That all combines into a capability. So a business capability could be purchase order creation. It's not just a process, it's a procedure. And it gives us all the steps, all the paths to create that purchase order. So you've got to do that. You got to know who the people are. I mean, who are the stakeholders that are coming in, who are going to be involved in that? And is this a functional team? Is it a purchasing team? You got to know all the roles, all the buyers and so on. A business process, create client order. That's a business process. It tells us how we're going to create the client order. We've got data. I mean, what data do I need to create the client order? What systems or interfaces do I need to create the client order? And what technology am I going to use to create the client order? Am I using an SAP database? Am I using an IBM database and so on? What kinds of networks do I need to create the client order? What kind of workflow do I need to create the client order? So all these things are part of that client order creation capability. And it's a good thing to understand when you're building that process model. So quickly summarizing, we've looked at business process management today. It's a well-defined starting point for projects. It helps us answer those questions. Why do we need them? When do we need process models? How do we build process models? And it really helps us understand what the problem, what the opportunity is that we're trying to solve. What's the impact or the benefit, right? Before I quickly close off, I just want to say that I work for IIBA Consulting, and we do instructional design and project management consulting. And as was mentioned by Patrick in the beginning of the presentation, yes, I do run the Inquisitive Analyst YouTube podcast show where we interview project managers and business analysts on their challenges and triumphs within their fields. With that all said and done, I want to thank IIBA chapter for having me today. And certainly if there are any more questions, I do see some in the Q&A, I'll try to answer them. What tools do you recommend to make mind maps? Well, there are lots of them out there. Xmind, I think, is one of them. I think that's the one that I use. So that's certainly a place to start. Most of these, you can download them and use them free up to a point. And if you want more functionality, then you have to pay a monthly fee. Deborah asks, what tool do you use to create your mind map? Well, that's it, Xmind or Xmap, I think I used. Do you agree? Let me see, Calogero, I hope that's how you pronounce your name. Do you agree that when we look at capabilities, people and processes are the most important, even more than data and technology? Yes, because the technology, these are tools to help you get things done that people want done. So it starts with the people. And Patrick asks, what have you found to be the best approach when training staff on how to create business process models? The best approach is starting by explaining to them what their role is. Where do they fit into the process? When they realize that they're a contributing actor in that process, then they're much more willing to give you the information that you need. So hopefully that sums it up pretty well. Patrick has put the link to the Inquisitive Analyst YouTube channel in the chat. So hopefully I've done justice to business process management, I hope.
Great. Thank you very much, Marcus. That was very enlightening. That was a brilliant walkthrough of what I believe is kind of an undervalued and underrated skill to kind of understand and develop. So again, thank you very much for your time and for answering the questions and the presentation.
You're welcome. You're very welcome. And I hope I've come in within time frame as well.
Yeah, you definitely have. Just for everyone, this session is recorded and we will put it up on our IIBA Ireland YouTube channel. There is, for those attending, there's a survey we encourage everyone to take after the presentation. It'd be great to get some feedback from everyone, okay?
Great, splendid. Well, thank you very much.
Great, thanks, Marcus. Thanks, everyone. We wrap up there. We'll chat to everyone soon.
Take care.